Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded March 24th, 2021. Good evening, Franklin.
Good evening, Edward.
When is it technically evening? 6 o'clock, or is it
When
still
you
afternoon at 5?
when you go to bed, that's when it's evening.
8 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
I have been going to bed later. The sunlight is keeping me up, which I like because I can get more runs in. And it's coming up a little bit early and the weather is warm. So I'm adjusting my sleep pattern. So a running joke tonight is that I go to bed like an old man. I go to bed at 7 o'clock at night. I wake up at, what was the day I slept in? I woke up at 5:05 or something like that. And I just started reading and meditating a little bit. And then, but no, things are good. Frank, what you done this week? You all right? How you doing?
I'm getting hit by allergies, so I have a very bad throat. So I'm going to stay quiet for most of tonight and just listen.
Thank God for allergies and pollen, right? Mother Nature knows what he's doing. Not too much from my side. Same old, working some Sentinel projects. Finished up a huge Microsoft Defender for Identity a project for a customer. It really drove another E5 uplift, so that was really good. Learned a couple things about it I didn't know, right? We stood it up at the customer. I can't say the customer name, and all of a sudden, all these alerts come off. Lateral movement alerts, PowerShell alerts, exploitation. It just going off, and these were the other security tools they were running: Tenable, Nexus, things that were querying the LDAP, right? Like accelerators, compliance tools. And so now they're going through like, is this normal react? I'm like, no, this is what it is. You guys had all these things that you were just letting plug AD and query. And so that's what it was. So it was interesting to actually see MDE live in action and catching a lot of stuff, even though they were false positive. Because it's a pretty boring product. And you want it to be boring. You don't want a lot of stuff coming out of it, right?
No.
I don't find, as a pen tester, I don't find it boring.
Well, as a pen tester, you wouldn't want yourself to show up, right? I can see you, right?
Well, if boring is the emotion that you first register, are you even working in security?
Yeah, there you go.
A boring week is a good week.
It's a good week, right? Haven't had too much fallout from the Exchange stuff. It was a rush at the beginning, but it's quiet down. What else I broke this week? Learned some good tips around automation by listening to Matt Egan present, and then I started making the Sentinel engineering calls that are once a week. A few things there, right? So with that being said, we have a guest. And our guest is going to come on and wow us with his knowledge. I've worked with this gentleman. I can attest to his brilliance. We've done some really good projects across some difficult customers who asked the impossible, but he seems to always find the answer. So now, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, what you do, what you like doing, what you wish you could do, what's your passion, whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Doshi. I'm a security architect on Microsoft's Financial Services Customer Success team. To give you a flavor of what I do, the last 4 or 5 years I've been focused on as customers in the financial services space adopt Azure, help them get their security program right. This is including everything from the service management and governance aspect of security right up to the threat analytics and incident response planning. It's been quite a broad scope of experience. Learned a lot every single day because it's a new space for most. And as you're going through with organizations that have been doing security for years, right? They've got the playbooks and so on, standard operating procedures, and you try and apply it to the cloud. You realize that none of those paradigms really fit. So it's been a great learning experience with these customers, and I'm thankful that they've tolerated me in their journey.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from you by association. We've co-opted on some projects together, and by virtue of what I do, I sort of roll off and then you take the customer to maturity. And you're right, you're not really product focused and pigeonholed, because I've seen you do everything from almost hands on the keyboard to get it done, to very strategic thought sharing to the customer, like, hey, this is where your security program is going. So I've seen you run the gamut. I mean, you sort of your title security architect, but I've seen you act as CISO, I've seen you act as CTO, I've seen to these customers, right? And they need this. And because the Microsoft security stack, both the M365 and the Azure side, is so robust, one of the things that customers find themselves is, and one of your greatest, attributes, and I've seen you do it, customers get paralyzed. There's so many choices. They don't like, what we bought it, what do we do? And I've seen you come in and talk them off the ledge and say, okay, here's a methodology to doing this, right? And even getting those who sometimes are not on board over to your insights and what you believe is going to be the most prudent course and roadmap for them. So I love watching you in action. I can't make all the meetings. I miss a lot of meetings that you and I are on because I'm just being pulled a whole bunch of ways. But so within this whole security thing, which is seen to just, it's been really prevalent, and it hasn't cooled off, but it really has gotten a lot of focus with the influx of ransomware because everybody's at home.
Mm-hmm.
You cap off 2020 with SolarWinds, and unfortunately, into first quarter, we got 0 days of affecting email services for those who are on premise. So, have you worked on anything cool like that? Cool being relative, right?
I
For the
did.
customer.
Yep. I did work on a lot of that. And there's only so much I can talk about, but there's something specific that I'd love to talk about. I had an idea very specifically about the technical aspects that I want to talk about when I joined this conversation, but you mentioned a few things that just triggered a few thoughts that, apart from the reactionary, more technical things, the things we're used to doing or being in control of, writing a query for, writing a run book for, a playbook for, to getting detached from all of that and just using the system to reflect the facts that weren't always laid out to the larger organization. So I'd love to talk about that, but I think you had a thought going on, so I don't want to.
Oh, for sure. I
Go
mean,
dive in.
The floor is yours. So go ahead. I got my listening ears on, literally, and because you've not told me anything about this, so I'm definitely all ears.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
go ahead.
So there's so much, like you said, there's so much happening in the Microsoft ecosystem, in the technical ecosystem space, from the security stack. You and I struggle. Let's admit it. You and I struggle to keep updated every week because there's a feature, there's a preview, there's so much under that feature, in the back end, the workings of what it does, when does it do it, and when can you expect it to be impactful, useful, and how do you build programs or orchestration around that. So all that is a lot. Plus, like you mentioned, just the evolution of the security threats, the role of nation states, and the scale and the muscle they bring into the security challenges that our customers face. So that has kind of thrown some realities that we weren't really in a hurry to deal with, right? So you take all of that, you take all these logs, and you think about the time when you were bound by the physical aspects within the data center, the memory and the CPU assigned to the analytics engine in the threat detection system to process logs. So you picked your battles, right? And then as you picked your battles, you got used to it. The industry reinforced that these battles are top of mind for everyone. And hence everyone was always looking at that subset of battles. But then there was everything below the iceberg that uniquely applied to that particular organization. May not matter as much to anyone in the world, but for that organization, it meant either a lot of active threats or just vectors that didn't meet the standard best practices or governance frameworks or didn't fit in any of those. So they flew under the radar. And again, because we go back to the limitations of compute, right? No matter how big you are as an organization, there's only finite compute. You've designed your compute for, say, an SIEM tool or a UEBA tool or threat analytics engine, keeping in mind some preempted scenarios. So these things that fly under the radar, the below the waterline aspects of the iceberg, they make a huge difference. And I was within that habit too. I worked on some of these systems that were on premises in the past. But with Azure, that changed for me. It was a question of what is that we are deploying? How much do we know about that ecosystem? For example, if you're deploying Azure Kubernetes services, have you dealt with Kubernetes before? As an organization, do you have the language internally to deal with it? If you don't, you're going to go do learnings, you're going to do certifications individually, but as a group, there's no framework. So while I was heavily focused on UEBA in Sentinel, threat analytics or hunting in Sentinel, the last 3 weeks, in fact, not last 3 weeks, I'm going to say, in fact, from December and more so in the last 3 weeks, because I got better at it, I realized that the role of dashboards is even bigger than anyone had understood. So you just take your Azure activity logs, right? You hook up the Azure Sentinel connector to ingest Azure activity into Azure Sentinel at no ingestion charges, no additional ingestion charges. And you look at those workbooks, they're great. They've been well thought through in terms of design. But the question that's left is who's looking at them? Is it the SOC that's looking at them? Then the SOC is going to have its priorities in place already. They're going to see if those activities meet a threat pattern, right? An established threat pattern, an established campaign, a known modulus operandi. On the other hand, there are people who know what is expected to happen in the Azure environment, your identity team, or the architects, the service management architects who developed the role-based access framework for the organization. So that's where I realized the question, have you shown this activity dashboard to those people? Do they have comments on this? Do they see something and go like, oh, wait, we didn't expect this user would be able to do delete activities across so many resource groups. Or we didn't expect that they would try to do that and fail. If they're failing, which means either someone's trying to do something they're not supposed to, or someone's trying to do something they're supposed to and required to, but just not being able to do it, which is causing other problems somewhere else. So that kind of looping in the right audience for the right dashboard and driving governance and continuous improvement conversations, more in the protect pillar, not just the detect and respond pillar, that has been just hugely rewarding.
And I agree with you because I've seen Microsoft take a very determined and deliberate focus on how SOC operators are living, right? Their day in the life of a SOC operator, both from a customer managed and responsibility matrix where they're watching the portals, or if you offload all of this alerting to a MSSP, or you have a combined shared, you as an organization triage, a low to medium, and then high and critical, sometimes it's handled by that. So just a little bit clarity for our listeners. Anand is using dashboard interchangeable between workbooks. So if you've been around Sentinel enough, it used to be called dashboards before they turned into workbooks, because we got other products that call it dashboards, right? So if he's saying dashboard, he meant workbooks. And cool part about these workbooks is that a lot of these things are being created for you and they're manifesting in your tenant, right? Because I saw a really cool one that we talked about maybe 2 episodes ago, 3, where they introduced a CMMC workbook, which is really cool for those who operate in that federal and contract and bidding space, right? For those who don't know what CMMC is, it's a new control framework for those who want to bid on contracts initially with the DoD, but I think it's going to propagate against any agency. And it's a cybersecurity maturity model certification, right? And it's built off NIST 800-171 and DFARS, but that's a topic for another one. The fact that all of these workbooks are there / dashboards is now customers like, how do I hit the ground running? Remember when I said one of your strengths is you show them how to get started. And that's a good way to get started. Here's where you land, and here's a workbook for you, workbook for you. Everybody gets a workbook, and they're very customizable. You have some more pointed um, examples of how this is, really making
Yeah,
conversations
absolutely.
easier.
Absolutely. And I use the example of Azure Kubernetes services. I'll be honest. Who's done Kubernetes for 10 years? No one. So do we have that body of knowledge? Like we have the body of knowledge for, say, on-prem Active Directory or the Linux ecosystem, Linux on a server or Linux in a virtual machine. We don't have that body of knowledge even throughout the industry, and definitely not within the organization that's doing it for the first time. So ensuring that the right people are identified and the right rhythm has been set up to look at the Azure Kubernetes workbook, look at the Azure activity dashboard in the context of your Kubernetes resource groups or AKS resource groups. That becomes very powerful because then you're taking away the load on building more detections by ensuring that you have these constant cycles of improvement of consciousness within the organization that cover most of the vectors, because now you're identifying things you didn't know, things that weren't standing out in traditional detection or hunting rules, and you're simply using tribal processes like, should this be here? And the workbook does that for you. It shows you what's where, it surfaces what's doing most in terms of activities, in terms of creates, reads, updates, and deletes. And you can then just go back and say, is this how we envisioned our cloud to work?
So how much of the detections are you seeing, or the customers using Azure Defender, Azure Security Center versus writing detections with inside Sentinel?
So I think the way I see them start is definitely rely heavily initially, most of them, not all initially, but the Microsoft 365 stack, consume alerts in Sentinel. That's step one. Because in most cases, they've had some progress ahead of Sentinel, more progress done on the E5 and those M365 tools, Defender ATP, MCAS, for example. So those are the tools they've been more comfortable with. So hence they start ingesting those alerts into Sentinel. Let those alerts work together. Let Azure Sentinel's fusion capability kick in on top of that. So that's step number one. But on the Azure side, especially on the Azure governance side, that's where they start writing more detections, right? Sensitive resource groups or sensitive subscriptions, create a watch list so that you know from the watch list which are the sensitive ones, because you may not have it in the Azure resource tagging or the Azure resource naming convention calling out this is a sensitive workload. So combine it with watch list, then with the detection saying this resource should never be talking to that region, or this resource should never be directly communicating with a public IP, because that would prove that first, there's a gap in our policies, right? Our implementation of restrictions for the network stack. Second, it will tell us if that communication is malicious or if there's been data exfil and stuff like that. So that's the approach they take as phase two when they write detections for in Sentinel. But phase one generally is always from consuming the alerts, using Sentinel out of box to do some of the magic, including the user entity behavior analytics system.
Like about the workbooks, I like using technologies that they weren't built for that particular function. So inside Sentinel, you do have your hunting queries, right? And they've been updated, and you can modify them. But I like using workbooks as a discovery tool, because I've gone through with some customers, and we go through the workbooks, and I say, okay, it's obvious if they are setting up the data connectors in Sentinel, chances are they're going to go ahead and enable or save that workbook that corresponds to that data source, right? But I've had some customers
Absolutely.
turn on workbooks that they with a high degree of certainty say, oh, we're not running that workload, we don't need that workbook. And I said, well, I've been out there, and I said, let me give you a little bit of field experience. The workbooks are free, not going to cost you anything, right? Unless you modify it where it's calling a logic app or a function or whatever it may be, right? I've had customers turn on workbooks for workloads they thought they did not have, and the workbook picked up the telemetry. And they like,
Exactly.
who did this? And it's the DevOps guys spinning up stuff, right? Resource groups that they
Yep,
didn't know
yep,
anything about, right? This customer, oddly enough, had Kubernetes running,
yeah,
right? And then when they set up Kubernetes, they put the secrets in Key Vault to be able to access it. So they had
right,
Key Vault
right.
running. They didn't realize they had this stuff going on. And so all of a sudden, they got a governance issue and a policy issue about who has what rights to what subscriptions. And
Mhm.
so there are numerous benefits of, I think out of the box, there are 91 workbooks that come, right? Maybe a little
I've
bit
lost
more.
track.
I lost
Yeah,
track.
it just, yeah,
And I wish there was a way, and I think we can probably write something that could probably mass enable all of the workbooks.
hmm,
And then you can just go off and turn them on. Even if you had to do it manually, it's not
right.
that many. I've seen some eye openings, right? The same way that someone would turn on MCAS and go, "Wow, we're doing what? We're doing this." So I I'm becoming a fan of workbooks, right? Um, I know some very talented people at Microsoft that write some really good notebooks. And
Right,
plus,
right.
if you go to the official Git, you can pull down some workbooks that are pretty cool.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um, I'm playing with a new workbook now that was given to me. Someone wants me to sort of look at it, debug it, and see the functionality. It's the Zero Trust workbook for TCI, and we'll put it in. Well, I don't know if it's private preview. I can share it, but I'll make sure you get it in frame. It's actually pretty cool, and they really want to gear it toward
Nice.
agencies and gov, right? I put it in my lab, and it spun up, and it gives you some really nice recommendations based on that Zero Trust model, right? So you're starting to see that. Any other cool things you're doing with these workbooks, or have you written some really cool
The,
ones yourself? Because are
uh,
you in CSU? You're not in CXE.
I'm in CSU,
CSU.
Customer Success
Okay.
Unit.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay. I
So
wasn't sure.
early on, I've done some work with a customer writing WAF, or web application firewall workbooks for the Azure WAF area.
Hmm.
And that was, we then published an even better one from the Microsoft Mystic side, the
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Security Threat Intelligence Center side. But as we went through that journey was amazing, right? Because then we were starting to take time to understand the logs more, the WAF logs more.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't realize that the understanding of the WAF logs more led us to writing better threat detections for WAF, or for the front ends protecting the line of business applications running in Azure. So that journey was great. Recently, we wrote a workbook that combines information from the Azure resource graph and then adds it with Azure Activity, Azure AD sign-in logs, and a few other components that were unique to the customer's Azure resource tags, right? So it talks to the resource graph, because the resource graph is the source of truth. If something has been deployed in Azure and logging for that resource has not been hooked up to Sentinel or any workspace, then you're not going to see it in Sentinel. Right? If someone missed configuring sending, say, diagnostic logs or deploying an agent on the VM, Sentinel wouldn't know it out of the box. So we were using Azure Resource Graph to talk to the Azure Fabric and tell us if a new resource has been spun up. So the workbook would list resources and a timestamp, and we would filter by timestamp with the latest resource at the top. So now I know which resource has been set up. And then I have another query running against a workspace to tell me if any logs for this resource exist. So that was our gap analysis workbook. That we didn't call it that, and I'm not using the right name right away, but we used it as a gap analysis workbook. So we're looking at things being provisioned as well as looking at logs. So that's the beautiful part, that workbooks can be hooked up to multiple things: a log analytics workspace, Azure Resource Graph, a blob storage file, or a file on a blob storage, stuff like that. That I thought was very powerful. So when we say things like single pane of glass,
Oh, here we go.
right,
Single pane of
from
glass.
multiple sources, right, multiple
Yeah.
types of sources, instead of having to pivot between pages and
I
opening
think
browser tabs. I thought that was amazing.
I did a little bit work, and that's a good point. Being able to use that to pull it, but I wonder if workbooks can source like Azure policy and Azure blueprints. and being able to pull that information in. And then your workbook is a counterbalance that said, okay, this is what you thought you had in Azure policy and Azure blueprints as you deploy resources, but this is what I'm seeing. So you got some
Yeah.
mismatch here. I did a little bit something with WAF a while back where a customer had a unique, they wanted to use the Azure WAF and map it against OWASP. I mean, they wanted to see the different OWASP things coming
Okay.
in. And I over my head at the beginning, but I got really in depth about web vulnerabilities, web exploitation, poorly written code,
Right.
keeping secrets inside the code, thinking that if you comment them out, they're still in there, right? But I'm not deep into WAF. I understand it because I came from an Akamai side, so CDN type stuff I know. So Akamai and the Verizon's DDoS stuff, but not nearly as deep as you are around that, right?
Hey, Edward, we got a question here. What's the OWASP?
Oh, well, the OWASP is the top 10 vulnerabilities that are identified by a external entity, and they look at things that are being exploited in the wild and or top exploitation methodologies such as cross-site scripting, SQL injection into databases that are on the back end of your web parts, API vulnerabilities. The OWASP is Oscar, Whiskey, Alpha, Sierra, P, like O and a wasp that stings you, right? Is that offensive web applications?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. Offensive web application security
Something
protocol
with a
or
P.
program. Yeah.
Program. Is it
And
program,
it's
Blake?
an open community that
Mhm.
collaborates, under the OS umbrella to talk about the top 10 threats to application layer.
Yeah, so it's sort of a
Right.
soft standard that people can go out and look
Mhm.
at it and say, hey, this is what's being utilized most readily. Not and probably combined with different things to create some type of exploit chain, right? I'm going to do this to be able to deliver my malicious payload. So it's readily
It's the
available
yeah, it's an open web application security project.
project. I couldn't think what the P was. You were right. I think you said program, Dodger project, same thing, right? Uh, and so we had to look at that and map IOCs, TTPs against those top 10. If I see these type of IOCs, indicators of compromise that correspond to the OWASP top 10 and or the analytic rules that are built into Sentinel and or the hunting rules that are there and to get positive hits, right? Be able to do that stuff. I don't know if you can do it with watch lists. Watch lists happen to be Frank's favorite feature in Sentinel. I mean, he loves watch lists.
You guys are beating me up about this. It's not that I don't like watch lists. It's just that I think that right now with Inside Sentinel, where you're just adding it and then just being able to delete it, there's just better ways of doing watch lists with KQL and storing those lists somewhere else right now. It's the maintainability of the watch list in Sentinel that I have the problem with, not the concept of watch lists.
Do you
So
mean updating them, Frank? Do you mean updating the
Correct.
watch lists?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So I mean, because basically you can get to external data through KQL and pull in a watch list anyway. So
Right. Right.
you've been doing that forever. So until they make the watch list functionality a little bit more robust and maintaining a watch list with Inside Sentinel, then I just utilize the external data capability.
Mhm.
you got a project, write your little Microsoft, write your little Microsoft form, right? And as they fill out the form, it populates.
So I'm always beating up on the watch list, and then Edward, you have to ask them the question you ask everyone about the Microsoft 365 Defender technologies solutions.
So I'm going to give you 4 products. Tell me what your favorite is, and then tell me what your least favorite is. And anybody from Microsoft that's listening to product group guys, don't get in your feelings, right? This is just a joke. Some people, so number 1, MCAS. Number 2, Defender for Endpoint. Number 3, Sentinel. And number 4, Azure Security Center. Which one, if you had to deploy one of those technologies, get one. All right.
Okay.
We're gonna assume that the customer has E5, right? Let's go ahead and make that upsell. Out of those products, which one would you deploy first?
I'm assuming this is workloads in Azure, so we'll keep that simple, right?
Workloads in Azure. We're just going to say that this is a cloud-centric customer. They got a little bit on-premise, but they've totally bought into the digital transformation, and they're in the process of finalizing their lift and shift.
Well, no, hold on a second. This doesn't make any sense then if you just say it's just Azure workload.
Okay.
That doesn't make sense. So
Okay.
we're
All right,
talking
so
about
they're
M365, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, MCAS, and the Office 365. So you really have
Fair
to
enough.
look at Defender for Identity's, Active Directory, so how can that just be so all right, so
I'll go
with
back
that.
and give
Fair
them a
enough.
list
That's
again.
okay. All right. This
Okay.
is a serious question. I sense it now. I get it. So I'll tell you what I'll deploy first. Okay. I'm going to deploy MCAS.
Oh, I don't like you
Damn,
anymore.
Frank.
I felt when I answered that there's no way that I'll check the box against the right answer. I just sensed it, but
Yeah, just
I'll tell you why.
I started to see Frank say, "Your Honor, he's leading the witness. He's leading the witness, right?" All right. So which one would you deploy out of the remaining three? You got Sentinel, Defender for Endpoint.
So
and Azure.
let's hear his reasoning why. I want to know the reasoning why.
Oh, behind.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to deploy MCAS because it will tell me if I deploy it right. Hook it up to all the network appliances, can make sure all the connectors are hooked up. It will tell me what my infrastructure and network really looks like, and then who's talking to whom. Are there SaaS applications being used that I didn't know about? Because that's my threat landscape. That is the landscape I'm responsible for. So I'll go MCAS first. Does a brilliant job of surprising the users with what their responsibilities actually entail, or the administrators, right? So that's why MCAS.
And
Frank, is that good enough?
That's good enough.
Okay.
I was about to say, give me your YouTube. That's not just so. Yeah, we got to get you on more often. So,
what's the last one? And then I have a question for you from the Twitch side. What's the last one that you would implement?
The last one, and this is good. This is a good question because it's an easy answer without the political problems. I will deploy Sentinel last.
Sentinel's not.
The other.
Sentinel. So you got to do the M365 Defender for Endpoint.
Okay.
Defender for Identity, MCAS, and Office 365. So out of those four, which one would you do last?
He's already said MCAS is number one. So
we don't need. No, I'm just trying to see if if he says the wrong one, then I will like him even less. Let's go.
So MCAS is out of the way. We've got Defender Advanced Threat Protection. We've got Defender for Identity.
Yeah.
And we've got what was the fourth one?
Office 365.
Wow, I didn't know this was a tough podcast. I think I'll go for. So we're doing last, right? And I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for Defender for Identity last.
Okay.
By no means is it lower priority. I just want to get to the last fast.
All right. So just as long as you don't say Defender for Endpoint, then that's fine.
So now, you can tell what his favorite product is, right?
So
you
now
can absolutely tell.
Now we have a serious question here. Can you talk about in the financial industry retention issues, requirements, benefits that you've seen with M365 Defender and also Sentinel? Because that was a question over here in our chat and some of the benefits there.
Sure. I'll start with a few challenges. So within the financial services, sector, that's banking, capital markets, insurance, fintech. So that's really a broad range of businesses. They come under a lot of unique regulations, each one of them. There are different business groups that come under different regulatory requirements. So they have to meet all of those. I believe some of them go up to 10 years retention requirements. Some of the more advanced security operations, they don't want to just retain 10 years in a cold storage kind of a manner, right? They don't want to just retain it saying, FYI, you wanted us to retain it. So technically we've retained it. It's on a tape drive somewhere. If you want to see it, it will take, I guess, 5 service requests and 3 weeks to pull the tape drive out and hook it up and stuff like that. They want not the 10 years, but at least say in some cases, 18 months, and in some cases even more, of those logs accessible on demand. So that's the reality. It was a challenge initially. Log analytics stores up to 2 years. So if you're sending everything from the M365 side into Sentinel, for example, or you're using Defender ATP, and you configure the log analytics workspace behind it, 2 years was a limitation. But what has happened very recently, thanks to KQL external data operator, for example, the first phase where we were taking the approach to solve this problem included sending data to Azure block storage, or whichever tier you thought was appropriate based on how frequently do you think you'll access. For example, if you run a hunt, does the hunt run once every month, and does it look at data in the block storage? Then maybe you would not choose the archive tier, right? You would send 18 months into the archive tier, 18 months into a slightly warmer tier, because the access rates, the read rate charges won't be as high. And then the ones that you really expect to just be dormant unless something serious happens, so that you move to the archive tier. That has been the mechanism for some time, but with Azure Data Explorer coming into the picture, that has changed some aspects even more. So I'm working with a few customers to figure that out exactly how they want to do it, because technically now you can have the source send the logs to Data Explorer and log analytics.
Okay.
Right. So there might be decisions where we might send some logs initially to Data Explorer and only some logs to log analytics. And then we will move the ones sent to log analytics after 6 months, 18 months into Data Explorer. So it's now a 3-tiered architecture. So
when you say sending it to log analytics, you're saying that that's what a Sentinel interface would actually query is the log analytics side. Is that what you're saying?
It will query log analytics, which it does right now.
Right. So when you're saying log analytics for people that are new to Sentinel, you're saying you're sending it to Sentinel at that point. Is that what you're saying?
We're sending it to the Sentinel workspace.
Yes. Okay.
And you can also query.
The other ones are going to another accessible area, but it's not actually being ingested into Sentinel at that point.
Correct. It's going into an Azure service called Azure Data Explorer.
Okay.
But you can point Sentinel to query as well.
I'm seeing that, and it's evolving, and I like where it's going. Here's my issue with it. It seems to be a feature functionality and architectural knowledge gap between technical delivery entities like you and I and Frank and the sellers, right? Because they're just using generic terms, and I think, and this is just my opinion, that they're chasing terms rather than true functionality. Like, because Google Chronicle is using what they call a data lake, and then people are interchangeably saying Azure Data Explorer and Data Lake. I'm starting to get these things where people are now trying to avoid log analytics because they are so adverse to the pricing. But my concern is, while you can make it work, can you support it? Because I was working on a project, and I can't say the customer name, but they were adamant that they wanted all the data to go into Snowflake first. And they wanted Sentinel to query the Snowflake, which is not a data lake. I didn't know that. It's a data warehouse, right? And it doesn't do that. And so I started working with individuals, and this is probably when you start be very charitable in your words, sales-focused individual lead the architecture, right? I'm like, it'll work on paper, but guys like yourself and Frank, we got to deliver this. And if this is so convoluted, I'm talking about, okay, we're going to bring it into Azure Data Explorer first, and then we're going to pump it to Event Hub. We're going to extrapolate the tables that we need, and then we're going to put that in log analytics. how am I to trust the fidelity and effectiveness of that data? The cost is the cost. If you're saying that it's not that expensive, the data is not that expensive, then work the other way. Put it in log analytics, keep it for 90 days, and dump the rest of it into Azure Data Explorer as you need it, right? Rather
Right.
than trying to put it here and pull out the stuff that you believe doesn't have the value from a security aspect. And here's my opinion on this. And that's the reason those that want to go out and sell a SIM need to understand no SIMs are cheap. None. None of them are cheap. None of them are relatively easy to operationalize, right? You got to put time in it. If you took time to learn ArcSight, Splunk, Sumo, Exabeam, take the time to learn this product, right? The other thing is this, is that it is a very trust and emotional transaction. Those who choose that are putting their technical credibility and sometimes their careers on the line. Choose the wrong thing, career limiting, right? So I don't like a lot of the architecture that I'm seeing that's trying to be repurposed in a way to avoid the pricing. Now it makes sense. Like I've already got the telemetry from this. I've already manifested the alerts and the incidents. I no longer need this hot. I cannot put this somewhere. Yes. But if you're telling me I'm going to put it in here first, and hopefully I can extrapolate all of the relevant security data out of it and put in log analytics for me then to rationalize and index, you're asking for it. That's just my opinion. You're asking for it, right? Reduce the retention, put it in log analytics, and then export out rather than try to export in. Because when you start writing these external operators and you start trying to do these things, I just think that the worst case, you miss something. The best case, I've seen customers who are double ingesting stuff because they're trying to avoid this thing.
Yeah.
I think it'll get better because I'm starting to see a lot of this stuff being done for the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I understand you got to have these features to compete, but we also got to have the engineering know-how beyond you and I and Frank. The people that are actually getting in front of these people can make these checks that we got to go cash. I'm like, no, sir, you can't do that. Well, I was told we can do it. But so it's not just me, it's you. You're saying the same thing. People are getting very
No,
creative.
I absolutely, in fact, would fight for that point, because if I may throw in a philosophical argument, moving the cost away from the cost that you see on, say, the bill to somewhere else is addressing the cost issue. Because by trying to get out of log analytics, because you want to reduce the cost, as you said, Ed, are you introducing an engineering project, right? Do you need to now start building something for Data Explorer? Because log analytics is a tabular structure, and the data connectors for Azure Sentinel, they're taking care of writing it in a way that's accessible to an analyst. So the data schema, especially with Azure Sentinel, it's using OSSEM now, the open source security event management schema, right? So Microsoft consciously made a decision not to create our own schema for Sentinel. Instead, we used an open source schema, which we use in Sentinel. And I think as of last month, we use it in the Microsoft 365 stack as well. So instead of creating our own schema as standardization and then creating another standard in the industry, we've taken what exists and works well and adopted it. Unlike other teams who have their own schema version, so people have to adopt, people have to engineer on top of that. So that's been one aspect. So we've done that. You're bringing in data. The connectors are doing the job where required, where applicable, of parsing, right? Ensuring, like you mentioned, reliable delivery of that data into that data lake, if I may. If you go to something else, because it reduces your storage cost, does it give you everything else that comes with the system that has, say, those costs? Or do you have to go to that some other solution and build mechanisms that take care of writing data reliably, converting that data in a format that's going to be usable by all queries consistently? Is it built for that purpose? So it's definitely, as of now, not for everyone. Maybe for some advanced scenarios, for teams with the capacity to engineer a solution. But for most, I'm seeing log analytics out of box is giving returns and allowing them to focus on detecting threats and mitigating them versus being the security platforms engineering team.
Yeah, and yeah, I 100% agree with you around that. And then here's my thing though: why do you need hot data more than 90 days, right? Unless you're doing long tail analysis, 90 days should be sufficient if you believe you have a breach. And it's not like you're going to reduce your retention period, especially if you have external regulators and controls. That's when you just dump it off, right? And so 90 days, Frank, you're a threat hunter and a pen tester. Can you get justification for keeping active data inside log analytics longer than 90 days, especially when you can offset 91 up until whatever your regulatory compliance is inside Azure Data Explorer?
So, it's funny is a lot of people say, well, if you look at time to detection, which is, 6 months or whatever, the question becomes, is there time to detection based upon how much data they actually have out to 6 months? Is it actually longer? So I think that you can look at some of the time to detection going on out there, real time to detection, and take a look. For me, to me, 6 months is all that I would actually want to have. From a hot standpoint.
Because the easiest way to prove something is to prove what it's not. If you go back and you look at whatever the market people saying, average time from a breach to someone realizes someone's in their infrastructure, what's the number now? 122 days?
262 days. Okay.
Okay, I got 90 days. They've been here a year. Okay, they've been in your infrastructure 6, 7, 8, 9 months. You're right. What have they done within this time other than get a really good toehold? So unless you're trying to go back for forensics and legal perspective to say this is how it happened and this is how we believe they got in, I don't know if you need all of that. Right now, there are things beyond the technology. A cybersecurity claim may say you need to prove that you detected or you have proof of when they came in. So there's no right answer. I just think that with the ability to offload relevant data to something that's cheaper and not as, and I won't say available because you can still get to it. I'll even concede 6 months, right? 6 months worth of data. Now, 6 months worth of data is relative, right? 6 months of data for SMB may be 2 terabytes. 6 months of data for a company that's bringing in 17 terabytes a day.
So the other thing is that you can now get table specific. You can manually decide the retention period per table. So you can also start taking a look at that. I'm very endpoint specific. So, if we take a look at the tables, then you can make those decisions from there.
Yeah. Right. And one other thing that we're not doing, and we're all guilty of it because sometimes we're being controlled by forces that says close the deal. If you're moving SIMs, this is a time to do some real in-depth log validation and rationalization. Why are you logging this? Who told you you had to do it? How long have you do it? Does this data have value? This is a time when someone's really getting ready to switch that you can get into the customer's business because they're reluctant to tell you because they don't want to either do two things, admit how much they're paying or admit they don't know, right? Some customers would have been brutally honest. We paid this much, we're trying to get cheaper, and we don't know. It was this way when I came. But if we're not approaching customers either new to SIM, displacement of SIM, or augmenting their current logging, we got to have this rationalization. Validate every log source you're bringing in. And then inside that log source, tell me why you're bringing that in. If you just say, because we have to, and I don't want to answer the question, that's fine. Then don't come back and say, this is too expensive, right? You got that fear of missing out. FEMO. That should be a data connector called FOMO, fear of missing out. Just
All right,
log
so
everything.
we got to ask the common question: do you send MDE raw data to Sentinel?
Or define raw data.
Yes.
Well, hold on. Define raw
I'll
data.
let him. Yeah.
The device tables. Why
Okay.
do you send that raw data? Not, I understand alerts and incidents, but do you send the raw data to Sentinel? You say yes, and I say okay. Why?
And so, yes, if you have plans to analyze that data beyond the detections that are coming out of MDE already, if you have the time, the resources, the plan, the vision for it, yes. If you just, uh, if you just, if you feel you're winning already with the MDE alerts on their own, and within that, just dealing with those, you have so much to do, so much, I would say, vulnerability gaps to close, then maybe not. So, and it's a big fact, right? The way security operations teams are staffed, that is going to answer whether the MD data is going to be put to work or not.
What
Yeah.
about pushing that through MDE, sending the data into Sentinel so you can deal with the retention requirements or the hunting requirements, the limitations with inside MDE?
Yeah, I like it, especially now that almost everyone is working remotely, right? I like, for example, the device logs. I would have cared a little less about those device logs because in the past I would have been assured that those devices are in a corporate managed network. I'm not naive enough to say that that means we never worry about those. But I'm saying now we've left the physical boundaries, left that network on which you had more investment or control. I like those device logs more, be it for hunting, for analysis, to see behaviors on that device across hundreds or thousands of devices, and then do some data analytics work to see what are the common processes. Then can I combine it with non-technical information like these common processes in these set of devices, do they reflect the same type of users? Do the users belong to the same business group? Do they have the same applications deployed? Are they same user personas? That can really lead to a lot of insights, which then if follow through that breadcrumb, you'll be able to close a lot of risk avenues, risk compliance wise, risk actual threat vector wise. So I'm a huge proponent of that. But when someone asks me, should we, I say, are you there yet?
Mhm.
Maybe you go slowly, or not necessarily super slowly, but you go stage wise. Have you stabilized operations around consuming MD alerts into Sentinel and the correlation that Sentinel does on top of it? Have you built processes or standard operating procedure around fusion alerts? And then go to the device logs. I do have some scenarios, and I'm trying to think from a business context what it was. I think it was what we traditionally used to call as an offshore development center, right? So a specific group of users doing specific activities, having specific set of information or assets. Those were deemed as necessary, although you don't have the option right now to choose group wise or device wise. When you hook up the Sentinel connector for MVE, you can decide what log type you want to ingest it apart from the alerts. You can't do it at a group or device level or user level. So I think that would be nice to see. That would be a game changer in my opinion. You treat business units as unique prospects.
Well, I've done it where the company was large enough that the SOC was acting as like a de facto MSSP for the rest of the business units.
Right,
So the
okay.
architecture got really, once again, it went back to pricing because the security operations team said, you don't get to willy-nilly send all your logs to our log analytics workspace. So they architect it in such a manner that, and they build back, so they build back to these business groups or business units, because those IT staff wanted to say, well, since you guys are capturing logs, we want to send all our Azure Monitor stuff there too. And the security people go, whoa, time out. You know, Every log has an importance if you want to try to build a complete picture, but you can't send your up down, and capacity logs into this. So they were like, no, we need to complete this. So what they did was they said, okay, that's fine. That's fine. They started assigning subscriptions, right? And they had that model where they were sort of, we're going to bill back to you for the amount of data that you came in. And it was pretty cool. I can't mention the customer name, how they were able to go back and just go into cost, write a couple of KQLs and say, here's your bill. And they had to pay back from the Azure credits that they were spending, right? Because you get that money in advance, right? You bill it and forward and use it. The possibilities are endless. I mean, it was a game changer just by saying it's in the cloud. That in itself, it was a game changer. And I've said it before. I don't think there's any competition to Sentinel unless AWS and Google gets their stuff together, because they have the platform to duplicate it. These other ones who still want to claim that they're cloud, but you still got to install a server inside somebody's cloud, where you're just running an IaaS workload in somebody else's cloud. But I think that, Google had Chronicle. It's dying on the vine. And I don't know if AWS really has anything that's robust to call themselves a cloud-based SIEM. But I don't see another. I don't see another player out there. Franklin, you see anybody that's going to take this on?
I say I'm like looking at all your computers here. I'm looking at that screensaver way in the back with the turn around, take a look there. Mm-hmm. Is that like a Windows XP screensaver back there, Edward?
It's a Mac. That's my MacBook Pro that I thought was about to die, and it actually came back to life.
Okay.
That's a Mac. Oh, I'm confusing you. That's I'm obfuscating what my true operating system is. Right? I'm not telling you. It's Vista. I'm running Windows Vista in the back. No, it's my Mac. I had to get it back up and run it. I was doing something on it.
When Frank spoke about the screensaver, I have the same thought. I was thinking of the Office episode where everyone's waiting in the conference room to see that small square on the screensaver go to the corner of the screen.
Oh, really? Go back up to yeah.
Yeah.
So, as we get ready to close out, if there was one feature inside Azure Sentinel outside of workbooks, what would be number two? Say, hey, once you get Sentinel stood up, this right here is going to deliver bang for your buck. And you got everything on the left-hand side. And there's some back-end stuff, but we're gonna say the product deployed as is without putting in, Event Hub and Azure Data Explorer.
Sure. Nothing, no customization, no extra, right? Just logs coming in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. I'd love to see everyone just go, once a lot of logs are in, go in and do a lot of hunting. And by a lot of hunting, I mean just run all queries and then sort them by the results they get. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's when you will know what you should do next.
Yeah, I agree. I used to say turn on every analytic, whether you had it or not, because once again, I go back to the workbooks. Well, I don't need to turn that on. We don't use that workload. Next thing you know, can I say it? Yeah, the customer didn't realize they were a Cisco shop. And next thing they know, they were getting telemetry in a custom log from a checkpoint box that was talking to a syslog server that we repurposed to send over, right? And they didn't realize that there was there was a firewall that wasn't decommissioned because of an M&A. And this firewall has some this firewall, I don't know if it was an ethical firewall. They acquired a company and they saw this firewall. And so they wasn't really like, the company we bought used Checkpoint. We're surprised in what was behind it. And then they went, they didn't do their due diligence about that. Was some very sensitive information, and that's the reason this firewall that was behind it, right? And then they kicked me out. They were like, nothing to see here. We need to go address this, right? There's nothing to see here.
You've seen too much.
You've seen too
much, Ed.
And but that's good. The hunting, and I'm sure Frank likes that. He's a hunting type of guy.
So how many customers are you seeing actually use notebooks?
I would say this would be my limited experience, but there are two who are exploring it. They're not using it in full production scale yet. but there's a lot of work being done. And I'll be honest, one of them is doing that because they, in their previous SOC, had built a lot of Python-based scripts, which made sense to their business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they just wanted to use them as is, and that's why they've really jumped on notebooks. There are other plans and other roadmap goals using notebooks, but right now they're just using Python to target to the Sentinel workspace.
Are they using
Python
the
queries.
libraries from, I'm sorry,
Mystic,
yes.
Mystic Pi.
Yeah.
I think they've played around with it, but they're
Okay.
so, I would say, positively distracted by the results they're getting with their own scripts, Python
Okay.
scripts, targeting the data in log analytics. I think they'll get to Mystic Pi in a few months.
Yeah,
Okay,
I've only
great.
touched 3 customers. I was on one today, and it's the same type of thing. They came from a Juniper notebook, and they knew Python, and so it was low hanging fruit to them to reuse some of this intellect. I mean, this intellectual property that they had, right? Um, I out of all the features in that, that's my weakest, like getting around in it because there's nothing easy about it. Even when I go back and try to reverse engineer and deconstruct the ones that are written, like, okay, what does this do again? And being able to go back and see it, right? I think there was an outstanding YouTube webinar last year. The 2 guys spent like an entire day talking about notebooks. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that. Didn't know that.
There's been some changes in the last few months about the engine that you would go about utilizing those. So keep that in mind. Going back to the older videos, I mean, the concepts within inside the notebooks are the same, but the engine has changed. So just keep that in mind if you go back to the older
Yeah.
videos.
I was educated at today
Yeah,
because I didn't have to lead it. One of my peers was leading it, and I wanted to be a fly on the wall, right? And just listen to him. I'm like, oh man, I'm taking notes. I didn't know that you could do that, do this, do that. You ever seen a watch list embedded inside of a notebook? I haven't either. I'm just making up.
No, I mean, define a watch
Theoretically,
list.
you could.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, table.
I could write a logic app to auto-populate a watch list. If you want to do, I can do a power
You know,
automate.
I gotta tell you, we just gotta get off this whole watch list thing. I don't know why you guys beat me up about this.
I mean, the product group, man, the product group at the watch list is like, tell your buddy Frank, I'm coming onto the show. All right. I'll show him a watch list. Then thank you so much, sir. Do you have anything you'd like to close out with?
No, I think as Frank said, there's so much changed in the notebooks. I would say just sign up for Azure Sentinel, the GitHub Azure Sentinel page for feed, for updates. It's a great place to know if there's an update to analytics rule, if there's a new workbook published. It's an easy way to stay in touch.
And it's also a good way to learn, right? If you go look at the ones that are being populated, that's being built for you, sort of accept it and just go through and try to understand what they're doing, right? Like if one of my old mentors who taught me everything about test taking, he said, if you go in there and try to prove what you know, you're not going to pass. If 1 + 1 is 11, it's 11, right? For the sake of this. Every time I try to go in and prove what I know, things don't work out well for Ed. Just got to accept what the question is and accept what the technology is and move forward, right? Frank can attest to that,
Yeah.
So, but I'm getting better. I think I need to get more skilled up in KQL like you and Frank before I start trying to dive into the notebooks thing, right? Yeah, you could make a career just writing notebooks, right? Companies have sprouted up from doing that. Isn't that what SOC Prime does? SOC, they write something like that. They write a bunch of notebooks.
They do really good work. Yeah, they take queries in different languages and convert them. Apart from actually providing, I believe, a lot of good detections themselves. I think a very important role of that bridge between the different tools and the tools with their own formats of interfaces or query languages. I like that. I'm glad you brought that up, SOC Prime.
Yeah, SOC Prime. I met them a year ago, and they were doing their thing. OFAR introduced us to them. I'm like, man, these guys are doing good work. And they're in DC or something, I think. So they're doing good work.
Got it.
Well, everyone, it's 7-11. I think that's a lucky number. Thank you for coming on to the show. You're welcome to come back. You will get an invitation because we're doing our end of the quarter roundtable, and everybody's going to come in and drink beer and just talk about security stuff, right? We'll see. And And anytime there's an interesting topic that you want to come on and share, just let us know. Come on and talk about it.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you for having me, Frank. Nice meeting you, Ed. Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. Outside of work, right? Outside of work. All right, guys. Have a good night.
Take care. Have a good night.